In this video, we're going to talk about Hawkeye and adaptive video test and how do you set one up, or even why would you set one up. So adaptive video is our way of saying, let's adjust the bitrate midstream as necessary to determine if your network is conducive to, oh my goodness. In this video, we're going to talk about Hawkeye and adaptive video testing. So adaptive video is when you run a video over HTTP stream, it runs at a specific bitrate. But adaptive is smart enough to understand network changes or client changes and adjust the bitrate accordingly. So we've built a test specifically for that. Let's log in and take a look at how we set that up. So first we connect to our Hawkeye system. We drop down to the test execution and node-to-node tests. So we're going to open the adaptive video, and you'll see we have a from and a to. So what we need to do is we need to choose the endpoints that will be involved in the video. One will pretend to be the server and one will be the listener. So you choose your endpoint, you choose your IP address, because in a multi-homed environment, many of your systems will have, maybe it's a wired and wireless, maybe it's a VM with access to multiple VLANs. So you need to choose which network segment you wish to test. So I'm going to leave mine at default, and I'm going to do the same with my second endpoint. So now I can identify this, name the test something between the two endpoints and adaptive, so I know what I'm talking about when I look at it later on. We'll just call it adaptive to site, something like that. But you can get more descriptive as you go. So I choose the length of time I wish to send the video. I choose the bitrate for the streams. I choose how often I want to run this test. If I leave it at 0, it means I want to run just one and get the results. But I can schedule this to run every 15 minutes, every hour, whatever makes sense for your environment. I can choose the number of streams. So instead of just watching one video stream, what happens if I have multiple video streams? And especially in these days when you have multiple video conferences, lots of video over HTTP, you're going to need to know what happens when you go from 1 to 2 to 5 to 10. And so you can run multiple streams. You can each test can be set up differently. You could have one stream, one two stream, one 5. So you would have a different idea of what's happening with your videos as the different streams are combining. If you run DSCP or COS in your network, you can set those settings so you make sure that you're getting exactly what you would expect from your video. And then you start the schedule and end the schedule. You can run it continuously, or you can say, hey, I only need to test this for a week or a month before I do a rollout, something like that. We also have adaptive video with network quality, and what that does is it runs the adaptive video as we've discussed, but it also adds network quality metrics at the same time, and it runs a separate side stream with a test for that. So you can see how the network may be affected by running this video, or if the video didn't perform, was it the video problem, or was the network different than your other network tests? So let's take a look at what happens after we've selected this. Well, now we're going to have some thresholds. So what's of import when you're talking about adaptive video? Well, we need to know the playback rate. We need to know pre-buffering. We need to know jitter, throughput, downshifts, upshifts. What are downshifts and upshifts? Well, maybe the bit rate is going at one level and the network contracts and it needs to slow down, so we need to reduce the bit rate. Maybe you've seen that on a Netflix when you're watching and it's just buffering, or somebody else is watching something at the same time, and you'll notice that you get a little different quality. That's because your video has downshifted. So we'll measure the number of times we have to upshift and downshift to get video through the network. So we add those in, give you the thresholds, and then you may say, well, I don't know what's a good number. I don't know what's a bad number. And that's okay, because what we can do is we can turn on these auto-learn thresholds. And as we start these tests over time, we start to collect data. And we say, well, this seems to be the band where your video streams seem to work in your environment. Now, if everybody's complaining, you'll know that those may not be good thresholds, but at least you'll have a starting point. You can also set a tolerance for when you're setting these for, do you want it to be a narrow band, or do you want it to be pretty wide open and say, hey, take all of these measurements because it's somewhere in there. And that's something we can help you work out as we go on. So once you've built that and you've started to learn, then what happens? Well, you're going to be alerted when any of these thresholds are exceeded. So what does that mean? Well, it means one of these tests fails and emails come out, SNMP traps are sent, and you may not want that. So what we can do there is say, hey, let's set up some outliers. Let's set up a condition that says, within 30 minutes, 5% of my tests fail. Don't tell me about it, because you're talking about people who are watching from home, maybe on a Zoom call. You're talking about maybe it's just a wireless, maybe it's just a network blip for a second, but it may not be indicative of a larger problem. There's no reason to scramble everybody to go fix a problem that doesn't exist. So with outliers, we can say only if we determine that there's a pattern and we're failing test after test do I need to be notified. But if it's just here and there and here and there, I need to know about it, but I don't need to be alerted. And so we'll keep that in a record, and you won't have to necessarily be notified to act on it immediately. So now I've set up my thresholds to be auto-learned, I've set up my outliers, I've decided how many streams and what bit rate. Now all I have to do is decide what happens when something goes wrong. Well, I can set on failure, send an email to a certain person, or send the SNMP trap. I can say, hey, if there's a status change, meaning it went from failed to open, it fixed itself. I can do that. An error. So the difference between an error and a failure is an error means I couldn't even start the test. Now that may mean there's a problem. You may have a bigger problem, and you would notice if all of your tests started to error out with an endpoint, then that endpoint is not reachable, and there may be a larger problem. But oftentimes, it's just maybe on a laptop and somebody's packed it up and taken it home. So that we don't want to modify your trends or your baselines by error tests, because those may make perfect sense. So an error is a totally different thing, but you may want to know about those, or you may not. So what we've done today is we have set up an adaptive video test. We've set some bit rates. We've set numbers of streams. We've decided which two endpoints would be involved. We've looked at our auto thresholds, and we've looked at setting our outliers, and then we've set up some alerts. So with all of that in mind, you should be able to now set up